Sharon W. Reynolds, President and CEO, launched DevMar Products with an idea to distribute environmentally conscious pathogen remediation products. Sharon is the founder of DevMar Global Healthcare Solutions, a distributor of human donor milk for at-risk infants. Riley J. Courtier Clothier, designer-inspired fashion for a purpose for the fashion-conscious woman. And DevMar Manufacturing, a facility providing quality control oversight for its specialty products.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds, for taking time out of your very busy day to talk with us at the Black Experience. As you know, the Black Experience is about telling the stories of successful people of color like yourself to empower young people and to help eliminate racism. So thank you very much for taking time to talk with us today. Thank you.
Adam, it is my pleasure to be here. I always like to be in a position to share my knowledge and my life's experiences in the work that I've done so far.
Yes, so far. That's right. There's a lot more to come, right? There's a lot more to come.
I have a lot on the horizon. Really excited about everything that's to come. That's
fantastic. No, so what I'd like to do is I'm always fascinated with people's foundation, their parents, their grandparents, the influences that they had, positive or negative, but those roots that people come from. Would you mind talking a bit about your family and where you grew up and what sort of that was like?
No, don't mind at all. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of pride associated with just that. I am fifth generation Nashville native, Nashville, Tennessee. And I come from a long line of successful entrepreneurs. And to say that it wasn't easy for them is an understatement, as we can all imagine from what I remember during the civil rights era. My paternal grandfather was a very successful auto dealer and had a great business, but he had that business in his backyard, so to speak. He owned a house in North Nashville and had a shop right in the backyard. And there were nights when he had to sit up with his shotgun just to make sure that the Klan wouldn't come by and injure either his property or his family or destroy his building and things of that nature. Yet he persevered. And he was so just courageous for doing that. He taught his sons, which he had 5 sons and a daughter, the core foundation of hard work ethic, even in persevering during some very challenging times as it would relate to Blacks in business during that era. My paternal grandmother was a former professor at Fisk University, and she was also a homemaker, and she kept the family together as a homemaker, and just raised some incredibly just multi-talented children. One of those sons was a musician in Nashville and traveled the world and did session work with your major country music stars and some of the really good soul artists that you hear today. And then my maternal grandfather and his father, my great-grandfather, were stonemasons. So when you drive down West End in Nashville, Tennessee, you can see these beautiful churches made of this gorgeous stone. And a lot of that work was done by my grandfathers. My father was one of the first African-American firemen in Nashville to integrate the headquarters of the fire department. And when I tell you he caught the Dickens, and putting it mildly, when that happened to him, had 6 children at the time, he didn't have a choice. And so he went through those really catastrophic events with his comrades, so to speak, that, they all are supposed to watch each other's back. And there were times when he went into the fires that he had no support from his own comrades. So those are the things that I remember hearing about growing up as a child and just wanting to be a beacon of light and hope for our next generations. So it created that hard work ethic in me. My mother was just and still is my hero. She is, or shero, I'll say. She still lives today. And to say that she didn't persevere through some really tough times in her life would be an understatement as well. So she and my father raised all of us. And when we grew up the first 8 years of my life in the housing projects, when my father was successful enough to get the job at the fire department, even though he had challenges, we were actually able to move out of that scenario into our own home. And so that also really led me to think in another direction when I turned 8 and was in my own home, and what that felt like. And that feeling never left me. So even to this day, I give back to a lot of charitable organizations as it relates to housing and educational needs of the at-risk in our community. And one more I'll add is my Aunt Gloria, my father's youngest sister, was just my champion. I would watch her. She was had several different jobs throughout her life, but she never took no for an answer. She taught me how to sew my own clothing when I was in the 7th grade. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I didn't know I was an entrepreneur at the time. I had over 30 customers, from, fellow students to adult women. Yeah. And I just knew that I needed to make money over the summer. And so then I had a penchant for designing my own clothes. And I guess we'll talk about that later in the conversation. But I come from a long line of hardworking champions on both sides of my family who have persevered through the toughest times you can ever imagine.
Yes. Well, no, thank you for sharing all of that. And I wanted to ask about your paternal grandfather. You talked about he had his own auto shop there in his own home and the Klan. Do you recall what years? Do you know, like when he was born, for example, and what years you were talking about, Ms. Reynolds?
Yes, that was actually during the mid to late 50s and even the early 60s. Okay. He didn't trust the banking system. He was very successful. They were living a middle-class life, so to speak, and all the boys, including my Aunt Gloria, would have new cars every year because he had those relationships with the car dealerships around the region. And he hid a lot of money in the walls of his own home. And so I could also recall him wanting to buy a life insurance policy to protect his family in the event of his demise. As an entrepreneur, you think about things like that. And there was not an insurance company that thought his life mattered enough to issue a life insurance policy that was substantial enough that would take care of his wife and his children in the event that anything happened to him. And that stuck with me. All those different things that I knew about coming up as a child really resonated with me. And I wanted to be a part of the solution when I had the power to be able to do so.
Yes. Let me ask you this as well. Now, I mean, it's 5th generation Nashville resident. Now, do you have family stories that go back to slavery by chance?
I do have some. We're still doing research on our family history, developing our family tree. Believe it or not, 23andMe has just been fantastic. It's a great tool to use to go back and trace your family. Yeah. But in having conversations with my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, and my paternal great grandmother, I can remember some of those stories. As a matter of fact, my mother would tell me that her father's father, of course, was half white. It was born from, the slave master. And, when you think about that, Adam, it's not too far in the distant past.
That's right.
And so I can remember when they lived in North Nashville, and his skin color, my mother said, was very light, and he had blue eyes. And so, but he was still Black. And oh my goodness, the torture that he received for living inside the home of what perceived to be a Black family at the time. He looked like a white man, but he was really, of course, related to the family. Yeah. And so she would tell me those stories, and of course how they were made to sit on the back of the bus, seating, and that didn't go well with my maternal grandfather. So there were altercations with the bus driver about his daughters they're not wanting to sit on the back of the bus seats. And I'm hearing her tell that story, and how they were spat upon when they were on the bus, and just those things that, you know, we hear all the time that happened in our past. There are lots of stories like that. So we're actually putting together a family lineage or history book, so to speak. And, you know, I'm hoping I can finish it, but if not, I'm going to turn it over to our sons and their children to continue it.
Well, no, it's a two things. One, you're right. The whole institution of slavery is not that far removed, and that's right. My grandparents, you know, they told me stories about their grandparents who had been in Georgia and been in Virginia and had been slaves. And I mean, on one hand, you know, it's right. It's horrific, but it's also very powerful, because it is one of the things I think that makes Black Americans so incredible, is that we went through from 1619, you know, up until the end of the Civil War, Reconstruction, you know, the Civil Rights Acts in 1965, you know, so basically, you know, 350 years of humiliation, degradation, inequality, and we're still here, and we are still strong, we are still powerful. And that's one of the most important reasons is, you know, what we're trying to do is to tell these stories, because so many people just look at Black people as slaves. That's our history, and that's it. And there's nothing,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, our resolve is just incredible.
that's right.
The resilience of you know, the generations that came before us should always resonate with the current generation. And I think it's important to teach that history. You know, there's a lot of controversy going on about whether or not the school systems should teach the history of what happened to the Black people during slavery,
Yes,
and even not just during slavery, during the Civil Rights era.
true.
So I think it's important to teach that history, but you know, you're never going to cover up history. It'll always have a way to come out. My mother-in-law would always say, if it doesn't come out in the wash, it'll come out in the rinse. So we will absolutely, you know, have that history. It'll never go away. And whether the decision across school systems across America it will teach that history to all children, so we don't repeat the same mistakes of our past. It doesn't really matter, because that history will find itself in the minds of the people that need to know about it.
That's right. Well, that's right. And those are great points. And it's also, I think we're in the same ballpark in that we're blessed to have family history, to know our family history, because there's so many people of color who do not. And so it's, you know, there is the sadness, but there's also this great richness and strength. And it's, you know, I realize, and I know what you're talking about, you know, we're standing on the shoulders of all these people who came before us. And what a tremendous blessing it is to be able to have that. So thank you. So tell me then, so you got a lot of strength from your parents, grandparents, extended family in terms of hard work, being an entrepreneur. Tell me some of the other elements that when you look back on it now, Ms. Reynolds, that really the characteristics of some of these people that really sort of made a real strong impression on you.
Sure. Well, you know, I'll start with my mother, who was just so courageous back then when I was growing up as a little girl. She has a testimony. Her first husband and she met when they were 17 years old. My stepsister was born from that union. And he was actually killed by a drunk driver. And ironically, 9 years later, the daughter, my stepsister, was killed by a drunk driver. So that was really tough. But the second death that occurred that I witnessed, was when I was in the housing projects, and my sister was crossing the street, going to the little convenience store back then, and didn't make it across the street when she was struck by a drunk driver. And she actually had to lay in the street for about 45 minutes, they say. To me, as an 8-year-old, it seemed like a lifetime. But the ambulance that serviced the white community was available, but did not come into our community to assist. And so we had to wait on the ambulance that serviced the Black community. And so there was some time that lagged, that she actually bled out in the streets. She lived 3 days later. But that really resonated with me, that, people could be so cruel. And I segue over to talk about my Aunt Gloria, my paternal aunt, who was just one of the most, I say, bodacious, sassy, unbelievably giving and gifted women that I've ever known. And she always taught me to never take no for an answer. Find your yes. If it's the right thing to do and it's your dream, then you follow your dream. She would always say, she called me Little Sharon because my dad's name was Sharon. And so I guess I was a junior. It was a joke in the family, but she'd say, find your yes. And that resolve was always within her. And I would always hear her voice, and I would channel her voice in my head, all the things that I set out to do in my career, which is an extended career. I'd always hear her. When I met challenges along the way, she'd say, in the back of my mind, yes, don't take no for an answer. Find your yes. If someone tells you no and it's not possible, then that actually means yes, it's possible. So keep going in that direction. So that was the resilience there from my Aunt Gloria. So it was to me, the women on both sides of my family were strong when they were met with adversity. They just didn't know any other way. And when you think about it, Adam, you think about our history, when we go all the way back to the motherland in Africa, that resilience, that resolve, that strength is in our DNA. It's built in us, and it had to be. When you think about everything we've been through as a people in this country, how are we still here? But we are still here. And that's part of our history. It's part of who we are as a people. And we teach, my husband and I teach that same thing to our sons. We've taught them, and also to our 4.5-year-old grandbaby girl, who is just as feisty as she can be. And we know she's going to be somebody special. So we try to really channel our ancestors and our generations that came before us and look at their strength. I think so many young folks today don't really have a connection to what really took place in terms of the people before them, the hardships that they endured, how they came out on the other side, and how we do literally stand on the shoulders of all of those who gave their lives for us so that we could live in a better situation. And ironically, it seems like the hands of time are being turned back a little bit when you think about some of the things we're going through today, but we will persevere. We'll get there.
No, you're right. Again, thank you for sharing that. And so tell me, I don't mean to bring up something that you mentioned about your sister being killed in front of you. How old were you, Miss Reynolds?
I was 8 and she was 9. She was my buddy. I have another sister who was 7 at the time. And so she was a little young. She remembered it, but Regina and I, we called her Jeannie as our pet name for our sister, was 9 years old at the time. And I remember it like it was yesterday.
How did you process that when you look back on it, Miss Reynolds? How did you process that tragedy? And then were there any lessons that you learned from that situation?
Sure, Adam. There were a lot of lessons. So at the age of 8, it was really hard to process it, because that was really the first death that so close to me as a child that I witnessed. I didn't know at the time why it took so long for the ambulance to arrive. Didn't really have an idea of what that conversation was all about until I was a little older. But what I think what it at that time, Regina was the oldest. And I was second to the oldest. So when she passed away, I've never seen my mother so hurt before. That was the worst hurt that I've ever seen, I think, in an individual. Well, if a mother loses her child to tragedy, then that, of course, is unspeakable pain. And at that time, I remember thinking to myself, okay, everybody else is younger than I am. I'm in charge now. I have to be the leader in this family. Daddy is working all the time and mother is in such pain. So I decided when I was 8 years old that I was going to be the leader, and whatever being a leader meant during that time was what I was willing to do. Yeah. Whether it was getting up early in the morning and making sure that I could help her feed the younger kids, or making sure that we all did our homework, or making sure that, and back then we made sure all the clothes were ironed for the kids because there were 5 underneath me, so it was I just had that take charge spirit at the time, anything to lessen the pain of my parents. And so I think it just continued throughout my childhood. I was a straight A student. So I really tried to do everything possible to make my parents happy and smile from that loss. And it took several years for it to dissipate to a level where we weren't just thinking about it every single day. Yeah. So I think I took that and transitioned it over to, I've got to be a leader in this family. I have to help take care of the kids. I have to do a great job in school. And I want to make sure that my parents are really, really proud of me because we lost our sister. And so I just carried that with me. It was a weight, I think, that I had to really start thinking about later in life, that it was a weight on my shoulders when I was a teenager. But I never gave my parents any trouble whatsoever. I always tried to do the right thing and making sure that they were happy. I love to see them smile because as an 8-year-old, that pain that you see it really never leaves you when you witness it. And so that was one of the things I carried with me. I wanted to be the best at everything. So my siblings would always say about me, "Oh, Sharon's a sore loser." And back then I pretty much was. And I don't know, maybe I am still today. I love success, but I also love to be able to make a difference in someone else's life, and to make sure that I never forget where I came from. Growing up in the housing projects for the first 8 years of my life, experiencing all levels of discrimination, and then finally moving into our own home. And I knew what that meant. It meant safety. I've also grown up in food challenged situations. And so housing, good shelter, hot meals for children and things of that nature, and supporting the at-risk kids is what my early childhood really taught me to do.
So I wanted to ask you about growing up in Nashville in terms of race relations and sort of how your parents prepared you or educated you about the community and about sort of America at large. But so the first question is, what was race relations like in Nashville growing up for you, Ms. Reynolds?
Well, my first experience was, I can remember when the sit-ins actually took place downtown Nashville.
Okay.
At Woolworth. And I remember the National Guard tanks actually driving down our street when I was in the Preston Taylor housing projects. I couldn't have been any more than 5 or 6 years old. And I was outside playing with my sisters and our friends. And when that took place, I remember my mother coming to the door, and she had this fear in her voice. And she'd say, get in here right now. And we turned around and we looked at her, and we looked at the tanks, and the actual soldiers were, you could see them with their guns and everything. They were headed downtown to tackle the violence that was going on during the sit-ins. Mm-hmm. And so we came inside, and I remember peeking out the window. She let all the shades down. I mean, can you imagine being that age and seeing that level of fear in your mother's face? My father at the time was, he wasn't with the fire department at that time. So he was on one of the 2 or 3 jobs he worked to make ends meet. But I remember that. I was like, wow, that was scary. And she had the TV on at the time, which was black and white. And I could really see those images that were really coming through when the Tennessee State University students and some of the Freedom Riders were there. That it was just really a frightening time during that time, and remember that vividly. So as we continue to get older in our among the children, we grew up, and then of course that situation happened with my sister. But what we would always hear from our parents was we received instructions. I would say, don't do this, do that. Make sure you do this, don't do that when you're out. And they were giving us these types of instructions that would keep us safe. And I remember growing up when I received my driver's license, and the instructions we received then, that if you're ever pulled over by a police officer, we all know what 10 and 2 is, and slow down, put your flashers on, and go to a well-lit area, which oftentimes we weren't out after dark anyway when I started driving at a young age. But it was just always the instructions you receive from your parents, and they were giving you those instructions so that you could be safe. It would save your life, but it was also very stressful coming up as a teenager. And I can only imagine how Black young men felt coming up as a teenager, or even today, still going through some of the same things, but back during the 60s and the 70s, how frustrating and how, just stressful that feels to a teenager,
Yes,
knowing that if you have an encounter with a police officer, then what you've got to immediately think back in your mind and remember what your parents taught you, let alone, you're just a teenager doing teenage things and growing up and trying to have fun and that sort of thing. But, we as Black children had to think on a different level. We had to think of ways that would make us come out on the better end if we ever got caught up in a situation like that. We always have to channel back and understand and remember what our parents taught us. And it's something that white kids never even have to think about.
yes. So as you grow older in terms of high school, now at this time, is your high school integrated or is it still segregated?
The high school was somewhat integrated. We moved into a neighborhood that back then was called block busting, when Blacks started moving into the neighborhoods, and then the real estate agents would come in, the white agents would come in and start spreading rumors about, well, there's Blacks moving in the neighborhood, your property values are going to go down. And then all of a sudden you see all the for sale signs. So we moved in a neighborhood called Parkwood in Nashville, where at the time when we came to the neighborhood as a family, it was probably 60% white neighbors and maybe 40% Black. And then over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, maybe 3 or 4 years, it was predominantly Black. Well, the school that was zoned to that neighborhood, then that's how it shifted. So when I entered that school, there were quite a few white kids, and by the time I graduated, there was probably less than 1% white children.
Okay.
So you just imagine going to a school where you knew that you were in a substandard type setting or environment, because there were so many things wrong with the school. Repairs that needed to be done. You could look at your books and know that they had been passed down from other schools. Or predominantly white schools. You could tell that we were just getting the hand-me-downs, which is, one of the reasons why my husband and I are so supportive of our school systems today, or school system in Nashville today, in the at-risk communities. We're doing quite a bit in the schools to make sure that our kids are not looked over.
Yeah.
So I remember that. And even though I had a great time in high school, just the greatest time, but we didn't have all the tools that our white schools had to be successful. And that's pretty, that was prevalent across America at the time.
Yes.
Still is in a lot of cases. It's getting
Yes.
better,
Yeah.
but it's still a really tough situation that we're dealing with in our educational system.
So you had mentioned that your parents gave you lessons and instructions in terms of how to behave in the community. Did your parents and grandparents, did you sit around the table at all, or really discuss the world at large? You know, what was sort of happening outside of Nashville in terms of race relations and, your place in the world, and how you should fit in? Were there many discussions like that, Ms. Reynolds?
Actually, when I was growing up, when I was younger, there weren't that many discussions centered on these topics. However, as I grew to be an older teen, I was able to have those discussions with my Aunt Gloria. She had so many examples that she experienced during her childhood, which was worse than mine. And my mother gave me some tidbits, but my Aunt Gloria was actually working. She was in the workforce. She worked for, at that time, it was South Central Bell. And she was experiencing so much that she wanted to bestow upon me and my sister, my younger sister. So we would have those types of conversations. And she would always ask me, she'd say, Sharon, so what are your plans? What do you want to do in life? What do you want to be? What is your goal? And I said, well, I certainly think I want to go to college. And she said, well, that's good, but what? And so we would talk about those types of things. And I would always tell her that I wanted to own my own business. I thought it was important because I saw that from my paternal grandfather and the hard work that he put in to run a business and raised his sons and his daughter, and gave them a middle-class life, which was important to be able to not have to struggle as much. And I thought maybe that could happen as an entrepreneur. Didn't know what it all entailed at that time, but I knew I wanted to be my own boss so that I could control my destiny and then help others in the community in which we grew up. So those were some of the early lessons I think I learned. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was an entrepreneur. I had a business.
So you talk about the great strength that you've gotten from your family, in particular, your champion, your Aunt Gloria. Were there any other individuals who sort of, when you look back on it, Ms. Reynolds, in terms of teachers or pastors, ministers, were there anyone else that sort of believed in you, was sort of your champion and sort of your mentor?
I can remember when I was in the 6th grade. Oh gosh, Adam, you're just bringing all this out. This is wonderful. Oh my gosh. So I encountered my first white male teacher. And I was just, didn't really know how that was going to work out because I didn't know what kind of person he was going to be. And at that time, he seemed like he was, I'm a 6th grader, seemed like he was just an old guy. But when I think back about it, he was probably like 29 or 30 or 32, something like that. And gosh, I was like, okay, so how is this going to work out in this classroom? He turned out to be one of my best teachers. I, of course, excelled to the top of my class. And I remember it was report card day. And I had all A's and 1 F on the report card. And I went back up there to him. I remember his name was Wayne Searcy. I said, Mr. Searcy, you gave me an F in this subject. It was English. And I won all my spelling bees. So I'm like, what in the world, did all my homework at all? And so he was really playing a practical joke. So if you take an F and you draw that right line to the right side of the F, it becomes an A. And so, oh my gosh, scared me because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot take this report card home and show this to my parents. Remember early on, I said I had to make straight A's. I had to be everything for them to help them get over the sadness of losing a child.
Yeah.
But, you know, he was really encouraging. He would say things to me like, you know, you're really smart. And keep doing this great job, great work. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's all kids need to hear from us is, you know, to receive encouragement from the standpoint of our teachers, the clergy, the community. That's what's missing. I think a lot of our children just don't hear it enough.
Yeah.
That, you know, they come from, a lot of our kids in at-risk communities are coming from environments at home that aren't so great for them. So when they get to school, they need to hear that. They need to have that level of encouragement. That's why we need to have teachers in our educational system who really want to be there, because you really are truly impacting the life of a child. Or, you know, because to think about it, I remembered my 6th grade teacher's name and what he said. So it does have an impact on our children. So that first white male school teacher, when I was a 6th grader, I still remember it. Like, you know, it just happened. And so it was a great experience.
Yeah.
But yet you think about some of the really bad experiences that our kids go through that stick with them today. So I've had along the way some really great role models that kept encouraging me along the way, along with my beautiful mother and my Aunt Gloria.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'd love to get a chance to talk to you some more at some point if you ever have the time. It's been an absolute privilege to get a chance to talk to you about your life and your success and sharing again the experiences and the nuggets. Thank you so very much.
Oh, I'd love to, Adam. I would love to. And thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the work that you're doing in keeping our history alive.
Well, thank you.
This is the Black Experience for all. If you like what you hear at the Black Experience, please consider clicking on the join button to support our nonprofit. I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.